Language study is a lot of hard work. It takes a lot of time and a high level of concentration to learn. Even after decades of learning Chinese, I still learn and practice new words every day. And it can be really, really tempting to want to take a shortcut. Believe me, I've been there, I've done it, but you don't want to. Don't make the mistake that I've made, right? You want to make sure that your learning actually belongs to you. Trust me, because I've done it the other way. As most of you guys already know, I'm currently in the middle of creating a new English translation of the classic Chinese novel Dream of the Red Chamber. I like to call this a living translation. It's ongoing. It's kind of live. I have posts every day. You can come over and make comments. You can correct me when I'm wrong. You can even argue with me if you want. The thing is, though, that it takes time and effort to get to the point where you can look at an unpunctuated manuscript like this and, actually read it. And the worst part of all is that there are no effective shortcuts. I'll repeat that. There is no shortcut that will work for you. Not if your long-term goal is to actually learn the language. The people who are out there selling you these shortcut methods or these special methods or whatever, they're selling you garbage. Don't buy it. Now, back when I was younger, I was always looking for a quick or a more efficient way to learn a language. And so I know how tempting it can be to look for something like a frequency word list or dictionary to try to get an advantage. In theory, you could start with something like this to approach the language from the most important parts at first. So it works. Well, at least in theory it works. The reality is that this is a great way to confuse yourself, and it's a really crummy way to actually learn the language. Now, the thing is that the frequency dictionary approach that I remember being so tempting and somewhat popular like 20 years ago or so has evolved over time. It's gotten to the point these days where you can just download the material right away without putting in any effort at all. Okay, if you're serious about studying a language, like you actually want to learn it, you should really use a spaced repetition learning method, something like Anki. I prefer Anki because it's free, it's customizable, and it's surprisingly easy to learn how to set it up and get it to work, though I do know that some of you prefer alternatives. Now, if you poke around for a while on Anki Web, you will find a treasure trove of pre-created Anki decks. These are decks that look like they will save you time. And here's a good example, the 5,000 most frequent Chinese words with built-in links to Wiktionary. So this looks tempting, right? I mean, this particular deck has over 110,000 different notes, right? 110,000, I mean, it's crazy. In theory, you could just use this to set up your Anki study automatically and just go through the deck and let that teach you whatever. But the truth is that if you use this method, this approach is actually going to actively harm your language study a lot more than it will help you. I'll show you why, and I'm going to start with the most obvious point. Okay, the first problem with this random deck I chose, and I don't mean to pick on them, but the first problem comes here in the description where we're told that the English translations of the example sentences come through machine translation. Now, fortunately, it seems that the cards only have 4 fields. That's a lot better than some of the other decks that we're going to look at. This sample sentence seems okay, and the translation honestly is fine. This one, however, is a little bit odd since it's completely out of context. So if I don't know what 那些 refers to, it's really hard to say what the translation actually is or how this is going to help you learn anything. And this sentence not only feels awkward in Chinese, but it includes a transliteration of a foreign name, which is going to give you a lot of trouble. Now that's the first problem you're going to run into when you try to use these shortcuts. You just cannot control for the quality of the language learning materials themselves. In other words, you don't know where the sentence came from. Maybe it came from some random list that's been spreading around online for, who knows how many years. Maybe somebody generated it using AI. You don't know if native speakers are actually saying the things that are in these sentences, and you're putting so much trust in this random person who created the deck. And with over 110,000 different individual notes, you'll probably get a year or two into studying this before you finally realize that there are many more mistakes than you originally thought. And it actually gets worse. Alright, here's a deck of advanced English vocabulary created by a native speaker of Chinese. We're only looking at 997 notes here, which is a lot more reasonable than 110,000. If you look at the sample cards, though, you will realize that this whole thing is an absolute mess. You've got 11 different fields here counting the tags, and it's not clear that you actually need to have all 11 to learn anything at all. So the problem here is that a lot of the people who create these decks will use like a Python script or something like that to go scrape information from certain websites or databases. And what they do is they just take the raw information and like dump it into Anki format without bothering to, like actually look at what it is, let alone check it for accuracy. So you've got stuff here like the International Phonetic Alphabet version of the word, which is only helpful if you know how to read it. There is an empty field down here for an audio file, which I guess you could fill in if you had a good source for the audio. Now you've got a Chinese translation for the verb utilize, which is helpful and which also is accurate. You've also got this English translation, which I think is much less helpful. Why don't just say use? And you've got an expanded translation, which seems to be very wordy. It would probably be better to just say this word means use, but sounds fancier. And then you've got this example sentence, which was clearly not written by a native speaker. Now, you might wonder how I know that that sample sentence was not written by like a native speaker of English. Well, it's because I happen to be a native speaker of English. So the sentence was designed to be really vague, sure, but if you look back at it closely, you'll realize that the word it is used twice in the same sentence to refer to two different and fully undefined things. And then there's this phrase, what is it? Ensure that it is utilized to the best advantage, which is just totally awkward. I've never heard a native speaker of English use anything even close to that. I mean, it really feels like the example was written by an AI chatbot. There's this star rating that allegedly comes from the Collins English Dictionary, though it's not sure what this refers to or what it's supposed to mean. And then you've got this absolute mess of information here, which is formatted in a way that makes it basically impossible to use effectively, even if you're a native speaker of Chinese. This Laiyuan field is entirely useless unless you were carefully monitoring your scraping script to make sure that you didn't duplicate words. And this is one of the worst uses of tags that I've ever seen. Now, the reason why I'm showing you these bad examples is because you need to understand that these shortcuts are actually going to cost you a lot of time in the long run, and the best that they're going to do is they're going to teach you the wrong thing. They'll have you saying things that are not natural. The people who make and share these decks have this like really bizarre fascination with content that has nothing to do with native speakers of the language. I don't get it. These people also love these really long dictionary definitions, and for some reason they want to include as many stupid and bizarre and useless fields into the notes as they possibly can. And so you've got insane fields like this from the word pile, which contains numerous unsorted example sentences. You've got decks like this Chinese complete vocabulary deck, which includes GIF images showing you the stroke order for every character in a whole phrase. You've got this deck with random pictures, more IPA stuff, and fields that don't apply to the Chinese language at all, such as gender and plural. Anyway, just stay away from this stuff. It's bad for you anyway. Instead of spending time worrying about what some random person stuck into the Anki deck that they decided to upload, you should be spending your time learning how to make your own deck. The software is really not that difficult to learn, and honestly, you should only be spending time memorizing things that you've actually encountered during your studies. Creating your own custom cards in Anki is not all that difficult, and it's actually a really smooth process if you plan out what you want ahead of time. It takes a little bit of practice to learn how to effectively create cards, but it's really not that bad, and you've got an advantage if you already know a little bit of HTML and CSS. And if you look through this channel, you'll find a few videos that explain how to create these cards on your own. The nice thing is that you can simply keep track of new words, sentences, and phrases in a spreadsheet as you study. If you set the system up by yourself, you can import your own word and sentence lists almost instantly. It takes me less than 5 minutes a month to keep the thing up to date. But the most important thing here is that it will be your deck. And that's the big secret. That's the thing that none of the gurus out on YouTube or whatever are going to actually tell you. It's a lot easier for you to learn and internalize things that you've actually discovered yourself. Now, the funny part is I actually came to this realization after using the Glossica method. It's funny because Glossica is an example of the sort of thing I am arguing against here. So Glossica's business model involves taking a list of sentences in English, translating it into whatever language like Thai or Vietnamese or whatever it is, and then having you listen to those sentences over and over again. The company is still around, though it hasn't added any new languages in like 5 years or so, and it has the audacity to claim that it's giving you a personalized learning system. Actually, when you pay the insane $399 for a year of its service, you're paying for a list of generic sentences read off by an underpaid native speaker. There's nothing personal about it. So can you tell that I'm a disgruntled former customer? I mean, it's kind of like a shortcut to learning, sure. There's this like community around it, just like there's a community around all sorts of really useless and scammy language learning products. And like Glossica does legitimately use contractor native speakers of the language to do the recording. So like the recordings will have native speakers talking to you. But there's no context anywhere. Even for the people recording this, they're like reading this thing off a piece of paper and they're like, this is a really weird sentence. Why am I reading this? Now, the hilarious thing is that if you go back to the old Glossica textbooks, the company used to talk about context as being really important inside those textbooks. So back in the good old days, they would send you a physical book along with a DVD-R that contained the MP3 files. Of course, stuff like this was really easy to pirate, and people would only pay once, which is why the company changed to this ridiculous subscription-based streaming model. But in hindsight, the introduction to these books has a lot of good information in it, just as long as you ignore some of the really lazy and useless pseudoscientific linguistics. Sentence mining, for example, is actually a really good idea, and it can be very helpful. But Michael Campbell is outright lying to you here when he says that using his method will make an introverted person suddenly extroverted and willing to talk. That's garbage. And this is the sort of crap that he's selling to people who already bought the book. But the point here is not just sentence mining, it's this part right here. When Glossica talks here about languages being a social landscape, it's 100% true. And yeah, it's easier to learn the written form of a language if you know how it's spoken, just like how grammar is easier to learn if you already know how to speak the language. And sure, you can create a foreign language structure that works specifically for you if you carefully mine through authentic native sentences and study those. Now that does work if we're talking about authentic native sentences, but those of you who've used Glossica before know what I'm talking about. So instead of learning how to talk about playing tennis or something like that in whatever random dialect of Hakka that the company decided to use, what you should be doing is you should be looking for those authentic native sentences yourself. In other words, when you create your own deck, you really need to be using authentic native media, not stuff that was created for foreign learners of the language. Besides, learning a language is going to be a lot more fun if you take the time out to actually enjoy it. So if you watch native shows like this, you can rest assured that the sentences you're going to hear are authentic sentences and that they are also culturally appropriate. And the combination of the story, the way the characters act, and the spoken language helps create an authentic language structure, not the manufactured slop that companies like Glossica are selling you. Now, the other thing I really want to warn you about is something that I mentioned earlier. Stay away from those lists of the most frequent words. I know that it's tempting. I know what you're thinking. You're looking at this thinking, well, if I learn the words that are most heavily used or utilized, like the word that we saw earlier, right, if I learn these words first, the rest of the language is going to become easier. But the only thing you're going to wind up doing is confusing yourself. In that book with the 500 most frequent Chinese words, the grammatical particle le just so happens to be number 3. Now, if you're new to Chinese, you're going to be scratching your head when you read that it's an aspect particle used to indicate the completion of an action, and the difference between these two sentences will make no sense to you at all. And its alternative use as a modal particle will confuse you even more. You see, this is the problem. The reason why the most common words are so common is because they have some sort of grammatical implication, right? This counts in every single language, right? If you're learning Chinese, you really want to understand how to use le, you need to work your way up slowly through the language itself. It's the only way it's going to make sense. You can't go read this thing about mode and aspect and all this stuff and get it. You won't get it. You need to play the language game according to the rules and the terms that the language itself dictates. You're only going to confuse yourself if you start skipping steps. Now, stuff like le will make sense to you once you've entered into the logic of the Chinese language. But if you're trying to study this from the outside, it's going to be totally baffling. And you're going to have even more difficulty when you get to the ba construction, which is number 41 on the list. Every single language has this problem. For example, the most frequent Korean words are all grammatical particles, and most of them are impossibly confusing unless you already know the language. German is the same way. These are all pronouns and prepositions. Spanish is the same way. Even Latin gives you the same result. Instead of memorizing these words, you really should just go through Lingua Latina. You know the best way to figure out what the most frequent words are in any language? It's simple. Just spend time with the language. And I mean it. Go watch TV shows. Go through like the textbook, right? Go find like a podcaster. Go get lost in the language, right? Like read stuff that's way above your level, right? And then like start looking stuff up and be like, why don't I get this? Why don't I get that? See, the thing is, the words that you're going to keep looking up over and over again are probably going to wind up being the most frequent words in the language. And even though it does suck to look the same thing up over and over again, trust me, I've done this, right? I learned Korean. I've got a secret to tell you. This is how your brain learns. Okay, I watched this video the other day by this guy called Justin Song called How ChatGPT Destroys Your Brain. Now, this guy's got a bigger channel than me. That means that he probably knows something I don't, but he also gives me guru vibes, so be very careful. But his points about ChatGPT match up with things I've read about how the human mind actually works. You know, things like neuroplasticity or how the brain can reorganize itself based on input. So if you're downloading like a random Anki deck, or if you're going over to ChatGPT and saying, hey, translate this for me so you don't have to do your homework, or if you're spending your time messing around on like the language learning subreddit instead of, studying your language, your mind is not going to be reorganizing itself based on language input. It's as simple as that. So in other words, if you're doing all of this like other stuff, you're not helping your mind learn how to speak the language. You're just like doing whatever you're doing in your free time. The way to learn the language is to expose yourself to the language. And that means giving your brain a lot of input in the language from a whole bunch of different sides and perspectives, like listening to stuff, reading to stuff, talking with people, and so on. I know, for example, that there are tools like Sub2SRS out there that can automatically create Anki cards from video files and corresponding subtitles. The result is legitimately cool, though you'll probably need to mess around with it a little bit to get the cards to come out right. In my experience, however, it's actually a lot more beneficial for you to go through the laborious process of making it yourself. So it means you have to, actually watch the show for one thing. But the other thing you'll realize if you use Subs2SRS is that a lot of the sentences that you're going to get from like your anime or from your drama or from the kids show or whatever, like these are not going to actually be sentences. Right? They're going to have like sentence fragments. You're going to have stuff that's like very, very short. It's going to show up in the subtitles. And it's a real pain to have to go after the fact and delete all that stuff. Trust me, I have done this before. It's just easier to make the cards that you need along the way. And while you're progressing through watching, whatever show it is, guess what? You can tell yourself, you know what? I don't really like this sentence. I don't really like this word or whatever. I don't think this is useful. This is the name of like the monster of the week in Sailor Moon or something like that. I don't need to learn what the name is in Japanese. That would be completely useless, right? You have control. The other thing is that if you do things this way, it's actually good for you. And in the end, the language will be a lot more meaningful to you if you actually take the time to learn it instead of looking for endless shortcuts. So stay away from the shared Anki decks and spend your time interacting with authentic content instead. And most important of all, you should find a native speaker to help teach you how the language is actually spoken. Anyway, do not go spend $400 on the grifters that run Glossica, right? Do not go on to some random YouTuber and buy their stupid language learning package, or that dude whose channel I showed you. Don't go pay money for this memorization program he has or whatever. Don't give your money to morons like that, right? If you're gonna spend your money as part of the language learning process, you should be spending it on like native speakers who are going to be your tutor. That's a great idea. Or spending it on going and taking classes, right? Go to like your local community college if you're here in the United States. If you're abroad, there's got to be some sort of like class you can take, college you can go to or something like that. Go there and take a couple classes and get your feet wet in the language. It's better for you to spend money on that than blowing $400 in a year of Glossica and realizing that they just talk about tennis all day, right? Do not pay your money for programs that do not work. And these shortcuts do not work. I know that they don't work. I've done them myself. Above all, please, please take the time to actually learn the language. Do it the right way. The shortcuts do not work.